Hello everyone and welcome to Second Viewings, the show where I take a look back at lists of movies I watched for the first time back in 2018 to 2021 and see how they hold up on rewatch. So, there's a new Superman movie coming out soon, which is meant to kickstart a brand new DC cinematic universe, because the last one they tried was so terrible and poorly managed that they decided it was rewind time and to just start over from scratch. That decision was probably for the best, especially considering most of the lead actors from it either left or became criminals, and while I'm not sure at the moment how this new one will pan out, I can certainly say I wasn't the biggest fan of this last one. Which is unfortunate for me because I somehow watched one of these movies per list, so you'll be seeing these DC Snyderverse movies pop up a few times throughout this series. The first of these I'll be talking about is Aquaman. So, I really wasn't looking forward to this movie. The trailer looked generic, I wasn't really big on DC's output at the time, and I just generally don't care for Aquaman as a character. Now, I'm not one of those people who thinks he's a joke or the worst superhero ever. Honestly, I never really got the stigma around him. I read a grand total of one Aquaman comic in my lifetime. It's called The Trench, and I remember thinking it was fine. Now, when I first saw this movie, I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd seen in years, but it was also hilarious. I remember laughing so hard at multiple points throughout this film. Every time a conversation was interrupted by an explosion or someone would utter the name Ocean Master in the most dramatic tone of voice possible, I would burst out laughing. I can't say my experience was overall positive. It definitely drags on at points, and some of the intentionally funny lines are pretty terrible, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't have any fun with it. Revisiting it for this series, I can safely say it still isn't terrible. Now, is it good? It still isn't terrible. Yeah, I hate to say it, but most of the enjoyment I got out of this movie was very much ironic, but that's not to say there are no unironic positives. In fact, let's discuss those first. I think the action for the most part is pretty well done. Yeah, I know they happen out of nowhere, and some of them didn't even need to happen, but we'll get to that later. And I know some people found them a bit headache-inducing, but I like how they were filmed in a lot of wide shots, allowing us to be able to tell what's happening. While the movie does drag as it goes on, I will give credit that it really doesn't waste much time setting things up. Within its first 15 minutes, the movie establishes its hero's origin, his powers, and showcases said powers in action as he saves people in a pretty fun sequence in the submarine where we're also introduced to one of the film's villains. And I didn't really find it to be too rushed. That's pretty impressive. I like how, with the exception of a few lines, the story is mostly played very straight with no real attempts at winking to the audience. There's a feeling of sincerity in the way these actors deliver their lines in a way that, say, a Marvel movie would try to play it off as a joke out of fear of being seen as too cheesy. Jason Momoa in particular is super charming as the lead, and his charisma alone almost makes up for all the terrible lines he's given. Speaking of which, okay, now let's get into why this movie is one of the dumbest things ever. While the action can be pretty fun, the way we get to these sequences feels really sloppy and badly messes with the pacing. As some have joked about before, there are multiple moments where characters will be having a conversation and then get interrupted by an explosion resulting in an action sequence, and some of these scenes, while decently put together, feel unnecessary in the grand scheme of things. Take the first action scene for example. So Arthur's parents are just chilling at home when suddenly these Atlantean dudes break in to take his mom away. She fights them all off, but then decides, you know what, I think I'll go back to Atlantis anyway. So what the heck was the point of the fight then? While their two main leads, Jason Momoa and Amber Heard, play their parts well and work well together, I don't buy them for a second as a romantic pairing. Maybe that's because the majority of their dialogue together is just exposition that ties back to the main plot, which would be fine if the relationship just started and ended there. When they're just figuring out where to go next to find the trident, it's pretty engaging. But they never have more casual conversations that endear them to each other, so when they start connecting romantically, it just feels out of nowhere and disingenuous. Then there are things that I just found really funny, like how Mira goes on this huge rant about how much the surface world sucks because we pollute the ocean. Then she visits one little small town in Italy where she eats some flowers and waterbends this fountain to make this little girl happy, and she's like, you know what? Maybe it's not so bad here. That's it. That was enough to convince her. Also, of course, because they're in Italy, that kid just happens to be carrying a copy of Pinocchio with her. Then there's the music. The original score is fine, nothing particularly special. I love how they played that guitar riff twice in the same action scene in the submarine within minutes of each other. Like, what was up with that? But then there are the original and licensed songs used in the movie. Now, I'll always have the utmost appreciation for this movie for introducing me to Sigur Rós. I apologize if I mispronounced that. And I actually really like the credits song, but nothing will ever baffle me more than the choice to include an original song by Pitbull that directly lifts lyrics from Toto's Africa. Putting aside how horribly cringy that is, which is a tall order, I know, but could they not have just used the original song? Maybe they just couldn't get the rights, but then why not just use a piece from the score? It would at least feel more fitting. They're going to the Sahara Desert, so this club mix doesn't exactly fit in with that. Another thing I want to point out is that this movie is 2.5 hours long, and it feels like it. So much of this movie could have been trimmed out or cut altogether. Like, Holmes and Watson may be objectively worse in nearly every way, but at least that was a breezy 90 minutes. Now, the runtime itself isn't the problem. I have nothing against long movies, but I just don't feel like there's enough in here to justify that runtime. And yet, despite how long and dragged out it feels, the ending comes right out of nowhere. After Arthur beats his brother in combat after taking him up to dry land, their mother shows up and is all like, "Stop fighting!" And they're just like, "Okay." So Arthur is officially declared the new king, and all the other Atlanteans, despite barely knowing this guy, just applaud and blindly accept him as their new leader. So it may sound like I have really negative feelings towards this movie, and yeah, I don't like it per se. I wouldn't willingly put it on again, but like I said, part of what I like about it is how much it commits to the campiness, and I think that's owed in large part to the film's director, James Wan. Wan is that rare filmmaker who I kinda love despite not really loving any of his movies. I mean, my favorite of his would probably be Malignant, and even that doesn't really get super interesting until the last third. What I love about this guy is that his films are super over the top and corny from a writing and acting perspective, but there's still so much craft on display from a directing perspective. You see, Wan's movies are many things. Subtle is not one of them. Both his horror and action films are loud and bonkers, but still have plenty of good directorial touches. He'll often use long takes that feel so flowing and well put together. His camera work in general is impressive, and he can even craft some genuinely intense sequences in both his Insidious and Conjuring films. I can't say I really connect with any of his movies very much, but I love that he continues to make them. And in this movie in particular, every time an actor says a super corny line with the utmost sincerity, you never get a sense that it's a joke to them. They're taking this extremely goofy material as seriously as humanly possible, and that's honestly what makes it so fun. And again, I cannot stress this enough. Whenever someone utters Ocean Master with the straightest face imaginable and no dumb quips about how silly it sounds, that little dramatic musical sting plays, I can't help but get a big goofy grin on my face. This movie is not very good, but I can't help but respect it for going all the way with its corniness and making no apologies for it. I'm somewhat curious to see how this new DC cinematic universe pans out, but if it took a few pages from this movie just fully embracing being a big budget Saturday morning cartoon that still contains a lot of filmmaking craft, then I honestly wouldn't complain. So I think that's all I have to say about Aquaman for hopefully the rest of my life. I think it's time I talk about some actually good movies now, so tune in next time for that. That's all for now. Take care.